My name is Ted Gwartney, and I'll be hosting the session this evening. I'm the Vice President of the Council of Georgist Organizations. And our talk, this will be the 13th in our series, and our talk tonight is how to talk with elected officials. We have three participants that will be speaking. First of all is Vincent, who is the President of the Center for the City of Economics, which is a Georgist think tank, and in conjunction with the RSF, Robert Schachenbach Foundation, he'll be working out of Princeton, New Jersey. He also serves on the board of the Henry George Institute. Gibb Halberson is a retired Wisconsin State legislative analyst. And Gibb was also a member of the board of directors of the Robert Schachenbach Foundation and their last president. He also works with Common Ground USA. And Dan Sullivan is the president of the Council of Georgist Organizations. He also hosts the Saving Communities website. So with that introduction, we'd like to then thank our sponsors, including the Robert Schachenbach Foundation. And which others do we have?
The Foundation for Economic Justice, the Henry George Institute, Common Ground USA, Earth Sharing Associates, and private donors.
Okay, with that, we're going to start the talk then. I'll ask Josh to lead off.
Okay, thank you, Ted, and welcome to our esteemed guests. And I have a few notes that we've played around with. And I think that when you hit the ground running as a Georgist, you have to eventually consider that you're going to be meeting public officials and that you have to try and meet public officials effectively. Elected officials are, if you like, they're the jackpot. They're the ones with the power to get the Georgist proposal across the finish line. Whatever success you see, it manifests itself in public policy. Without a politician eventually on your side, the only other alternative is pitchforks and tars and feather, and we don't want that. Georgists are peaceful. So if any Georgist wants to make a difference, you have to start at the beginning. And it's pretty basic, and Gibb is going to talk about this later, and so will Dan. But if you're just starting out trying to talk to officials, you want to get a meeting, and you start with an email or more prosaically a letter. I don't think that's done anymore. And then you follow it with a phone call. Or if you're at a community event and you see a council person or a legislator, you try to buttonhole them. And sometimes that's very effective as well. So you do make your request eventually in writing so that you follow up with a call to the office scheduler. And waiting about 4 days is what I do. You know, you send the email, letter, whatever, and then call the scheduler. So let them know what your issue is, either legislation, a bill with bill number, or a local issue that's hot, affordable housing, more funds for government, because that's a big issue now. There isn't any money left. And so let them know what the issue or the legislation is. And notice I say issues, legislation, and terms that everybody else uses. The League of Women Voters or the ACLU, the NRA, what have you. So if a legislator knows Henry George, that's great. But if you count on it, you're already wrecked. It happens on very, very rare occasions. A fellow longtime Georgist, Walt Rybeck, and myself met Clarence Davis, who was a delegate in the Maryland General Assembly some years ago. And we launched into our pitch. He was very good, but he's about the only person that said, "Oh, I've been waiting all my life to help old Henry." And he had P&P in his office, and that was impressive. That never happens. So if you do talk about Henry George, you may get a first, but a very brief meeting. If you start and end up with the law of rent, it won't work. Lectures don't work. My mentor, Steve Cord, came up with a plan when he went to visit various officials in Western Pennsylvania. And he was really in the toe of older Georgists from the then Henry George Foundation in Pittsburgh. And they chit-chatted, and then in some cases, I can remember Wiley Young, who some of you may have heard about or may have even known. He would arouse the politicians, and they'd say, "Okay, we're in. Now what?" And he would say, "Joe, you do it." So it's moving from hope to practice is, I think, the most important thing. So you suggest a time and a date for this meeting. Let them offer an alternative if they want. And keep in mind, the scheduler works for an elected official. Therefore, they're working for you. And be polite, but don't be put off. Now, I don't think any of us here, Dan, Gibb, or myself, has ever taken no for an answer. Eventually, we wear them down. So make sure that they know that you're a constituent or represent an organization or interest that's of direct relevance to the issue, to an issue that the legislator would be concerned about. Now, when we get ready for meetings, and I'll get a little anecdotal because I'm more entertaining when I do that, but you call an experienced Georgist organization, and that could be my little outfit at the Center for the Study of Economics. It could be savingcommunities.org, could be the Robert Schalkenbach Foundation, or the Henry George School. But they have materials, and all of us, each of us should have the information that you need to help you decide on your talking points, as well as articles and reports that you can leave with them. But I would stress this issue: fresh fish tastes best. A really interesting article from 1902 is not going to cut it, and you'll see it in their eyes. And you should decide well in advance if you're going to have a physical meeting, which I think is pretty inevitable. You can very rarely get by without a meeting. Decide who's going to come with you. Bringing more than 4 or 5 people, that's a real bear. It doesn't work. Keep it small, but bring people who have perspectives that are a little different from yours. If you can get people in the community, you get a businessman, you get a lawyer, business person, you get a lawyer, you get a union leader. I think our Allentown experience was helpful in that when we started an actual movement to get LVT adopted during the Home Rule Charter, I was brought in to speak. Steve Cord was brought in to speak to the officials. But the people that joined us were a restaurant owner, Louis Bellatieri, and Bill Kells, who was a Henry George Foundation trustee, who sort of got the ball rolling. Some of these names may be familiar. And Pat Toomey, who we had turned on to the idea. So eventually we started meeting with council people and with people on a home rule charter, and it worked. But we had to bring people with differing viewpoints, most especially people from the left and the right. In Connecticut, it was very helpful that we had AFSCME on our side and endorsing LVT. And we also had the Connecticut Home Builders Association, along with the Sierra Club of Connecticut. So when you think about it, what do you have? You have very strange bedfellows, and it's very rare in state politics or even local politics where you can get people that normally would not get along to work together for a certain effort or cause. And in Connecticut, it was to get statewide legalization of LVT. So anyhow, you've got this group, but you're going to meet beforehand. You're going to talk about your talking points, and you're going to agree to disagree sometimes. When you get into the meeting and you start fighting amongst each other, which I've seen on many occasions, you're going to really lose your credibility. And if that ever happens, you can't invite the person causing trouble ever again. And I really wouldn't worry about hurt feelings, because if you don't look like you have your act together, chances are you won't get a second chance. Time is limited in meetings like this, and I'm going to be done in just a few minutes to show that brevity is the soul of wit or something. And one person at the meeting is going to be the master of ceremonies. For example, in Connecticut, it was a young Republican legislator who has since left the Republican Party, but he was the master of ceremonies. He said, oh, here we have Art Costa from New London. Oh, we have Josh Vincent from the Center for the Study of Economics. And then he says his piece, and then we all say our piece. And we really do it briefly. Individuals are great on their own, but in a group, if you act like an individual, you're going to ruin the event. You've got to really develop a team spirit. It's not necessarily even team building. You might not see them again, but you've got to know when to speak up and when to be quiet. That's tough for a lot of people, not just Georgists. So be prompt, show up for the meeting. And I have this as a document if anybody wants it. But I think at most you're going to get on a first meeting 20 minutes. If it goes beyond 20 minutes, then you've done something. You've attracted their attention. And after 30 minutes, you've made an effect. You've had an impact. And this has happened on many occasions, probably with Dan and Gibb too, is if the politician says, hold on a minute, and calls for somebody down the hall, another legislator, then you're gold, because he wants to share what he's just discovered or she's just discovered with the colleagues that they have. And that's happened at the local level, at the council level. It's happened at the state level. All of a sudden, because we have a really good idea and a great idea, if we deliver it dispassionately but forcefully and with assurance, people are going to want to know more. And that's really the secret to meeting elected officials, is that your first meeting is your struggle to get a second meeting. Now that sounds dumb, maybe. It's not, though. It's something that you have to think about. Politics is a long process, and you have to learn how to be patient, and you have to let them know that you'll follow up. It's okay to say, I don't know. In fact, it's terrific if you say you don't know. If you make something up on the spot, you've blown your credibility permanently. You say, I'll get back to you, and that's a great way to get the second meeting. So stick to your talking points, and stay on topic, and back them up with no more than 5 items of materials. That's what I use. Gibb had delivered to the CGO some documents that we recommend, and I'm sure that'll be passed out later by our CGO staff. Now, conversely, if the prospect wants to talk about the 1962 Mets for 20 minutes, nod your head. and say, yeah, how about that marvelous Marv Throneberry? Whatever they want to do, let them do. Because they say, wow, they talked about the Mets with me. I'll remember them. So you want to provide examples, and that's going to be a part and parcel of the materials that you've already gotten from your established Georgist organizations that produce fresh and new material. And if you can write something that affects the local issue, which is what happened in Allentown, that's how you really get a ball rolling. You don't say, oh, we've got these people from Maryland and Arden, Delaware, and Philadelphia who are going to come up and change your lives. It doesn't work like that. What you're going to do is essentially get the ball rolling and then let them take over, especially with the legislation. So after the meeting, you want to set some deadlines. You want to fulfill every promise you made. And I think that's really the gist of what I'm trying to get across, is that you don't do a Vulcan mind meld, but you're really trying to make them relate to the issue so that eventually they say, this is my issue too. Or they might say, this is my issue. I don't know who those guys are. But as long as they adopt Georgism or land value taxation, they'll be good for at least 2 terms or however long they're in office. And just keep following up and never give up, to paraphrase Churchill. Never, ever, ever give up. People are frightened today. Elected officials, real people, are frightened to death about what's going to happen. And it's not just the social unrest, although there's a lot to do with that. It's not just COVID-19, but what's happening is a real questioning of the role of government and how it can do anything effective. And I think it's a really great time for us to provide not just a message, but a real answer to a problem. Who's going to pay for it? Well, that's all I've got. Thanks very much. And I'm tossing it back to Ted.
Yes, thank you very much, Dan. I think now we'll ask Gibb to speak to the subject.
Hello. First, I'd like to clear up a minor point in that I did serve as a legislative aide for about a year and found out that there wasn't a lot of job security in that. I ended up on the fire department, where I ended up working for more than 20 years, and that was very interesting. In addition to that, that allowed me to attend my union meetings and fire departments. I'm also a Vietnam veteran. I go to veteran activities. So being a Georgist, a veteran, and a firefighter, each one of those has unique rules. That they have all sorts of county laws and state rules and federal rules. And the more you can prepare for your meeting by knowing what those rules are, the better off you're going to be. And that you have probably gone through a lot of preparation, because we all have talked with our spouses, our parents, our friends, our neighbors, and we have, hopefully we have not bored them with the idea of Henry George, but if we have, then we have learned that you can't talk forever about the subject. You have to cut it off after about 15 minutes or they will leave on their own accord. So the first thing you have to do is prepare for your meeting. And this can be just as modest as talking with your spouse and letting them hear what your prepared speech is going to be, and then ask that you understand it. Is that something that interests you? Do you see the merit in it? And of course, everybody's a critic. Okay, so what could I do better? And as you go along, you'll soon find out what your best delivery is. And you need to master an elevator speech, something that might be 2 to 3 minutes long, and that is your introduction. Why are you here talking with this individual? What you can find is that your speech leads to questions. And as Josh said, if they have questions, that's good. If you can answer them, that's wonderful. But getting back to them, that allows you to show up again and again and again, because all they need to do is ask you one question and then say, let me go home and I'll research that and get back with you in a couple of weeks. But before you go in and talk with the mayor or your state representative or someone like that, start out with a person that works on the city council, the county board. And hopefully they would be in your district so that they want to meet you, because you at least represent one vote that they want. And you can now come in and say, well, I've got this idea, and you might find it helpful. And of course, before you do that, you might give them some paper to read. And then of course, follow it up of, did you receive that paper? And okay, then we'll talk in about a week or so. We'll either meet at Starbucks or at your office or wherever is convenient for them. And we all have smartphones these days. It might help if you go around in the district that you're talking about, your district, or if you're talking with the mayor. The mayor is well aware of where those vacant lots are, and that you can now come with your smartphone and say, I live in this community too, and I've noticed that this vacant lot has been like that ever since I moved in 10 years ago. And is there anything that can be done to encourage its development so that we can get people to work? And they are well aware of the problem, because they also live in the community and they have also seen that vacant lot just sitting there for the last 10 to 20 years. And they have scratched their head, and they've probably talked with a number of people and said, oh, what can we do about that? And then somebody will give them something and they'll kind of move on. But the mayors, the common council, the county commissioners, the state representatives, they have a full plate. They have to worry about picking up the garbage, putting out the fires, the behavior of the police, whether or not the assessments are accurate, whether or not we've got a 4th of July parade, whether or not we're going to expand east, west, or up. And that they have all of those things that they are juggling, and that people come to them for all kinds of reasons, everything from recycling to the parks to veteran affairs to Georgism, land use and zoning, and all of those ideas. And so you are fitting in just a small part of what their legislative agenda is, because they, at the end of the day, they have to balance the books. And that is probably their main concern, is where are we getting the money just to keep the lights on? And that you are now giving them a favor, you are doing them a favor by giving them an idea that doesn't cost anything. Because everyone else is coming there and saying, we would really like some more park equipment, you know, some playgrounds, some slides and swings for the kids. And oh, by the way, it'll only cost $5,000. Well, that's fine. But now you've got all the other common council people saying, well, if that person got $5,000 for a park in their district, well, I want $5,000 for the park in my district. Suddenly the bill has gone up to $100,000 just because you thought that it would be nice to have a couple of swing sets at the local park. So that you are showing up with an idea that doesn't really cost anything. The cost that might come in is that in Philadelphia, they ended up hiring Bruno Moser. Many of you remember him, and that he worked as a comptroller. So he was running the numbers on various lots and assessments and what various lots were worth. Now, granted, that is a cost, but the cost that we are looking for are really bureaucratic costs of either a study, and that is the most likely avenue that you're going to get first, because you are coming in with this great idea and saying it's wonderful, 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 but they either have to take your word for it, and they would be foolish to do that, is that you are now recommending that the city council on their own, they've got a planning committee, they've got all sorts of bureaucratic committees. Hey, study it. See what, am I lying? You'll find out that what I'm telling you is the truth, and that this is an idea whose time has come, and they will appreciate that. So I'll leave it there. Prepare before you go in, work out your elevator speech, and know what the rules are so that you can talk intelligently, because most of these people are very well versed on the area that got them elected to begin with. And that may have been recycling or water quality in the nearby lakes, or crime on one part of town, or something else. So they're very well aware of one or two subjects that got them elected, and you are getting them to broaden their horizon. I will stop there.
Okay, thank you very much, Gibb. We're going to give Dan Sullivan a chance to talk at this point.
Okay. Yeah, I think everything that was said was good. I mostly wrote notes to follow up on it. One thing that you can do a lot of research on your computer with what's available publicly. The one thing you can rarely find is the total taxable land and building assessments in your in the taxing jurisdiction you're talking about. So one of the things that you have to do is you can ask the county assessors. They usually have a total. You can ask the municipal tax collector. They usually have a total. The budget people in your municipality, even if it's a small borough, they have a total because they have to know how much money the tax is going to raise. And they don't always have a land and building total separately, but a lot of times they do. But whatever that total is, that tells you who pays more and who pays less. So if the total land value, we'll just pick a round number, which you won't be so lucky, but we'll just say if the total land value is 3 times the building value, that means they have to increase the land tax 3 mils or 0.3% for every 1 mil they lower the building tax. So if your own personal property has a 3-to-1 ratio, you break even. But if your own personal property has a better building to land ratio, you save money. And if your own personal property has a worse building to land ratio, you pay more. So you can look at dozens or hundreds of properties, or if you can get the computer database for the whole jurisdiction, you can look at all of them. And you can say how many pay more and how many pay less. Now, when I was young, I didn't, you get more wisdom and less energy as you age. So when I was young, I was fortunate because Steve Cord basically said, this is how we do it. And I pretty much did with what he said. And Bill Coyne already liked this. And he said, no, this is what I need, go do this. And I went and did it. And if you don't have somebody to tell you that, then you can ask, you can ask Josh or Gibb or me or others who've done this for a while what the most effective thing has been. But it's usually simple, straightforward data research. One thing that I wanted to mention is you need to research the people you're going to talk to. And for 2 reasons. One is you need to know what their job is. If you're talking to a state legislator, his job is not just to be a state legislator. You want to find the state legislator who's the head of the local government committee, because his job is to deal with bills that will give local options to those local governments. And you probably need to deal with the finance committee, even if it's like we had a borough option bill, and it eventually got passed, but the year before it went to the end and we found out it got killed because they sent it to the finance committee. Well, we didn't think it had to go to the finance committee, and nobody else did either, because it didn't involve any state finances. But somebody wanted to kill the bill, so they sent it to another committee where they had people on board who didn't like the proposal. One thing is that rancor obstructs. So if you were in a political situation and somebody is trying to do something you don't want them to do, you can stink up the place, and people will get so fed up with the rancor that they won't do it. But we're not in that situation. We're trying to get people to do something they absolutely don't have to do. So rancor is not on our side. So you want to avoid controversy. You want to avoid any disparaging remarks about opponents. You want to avoid anything being personalized. So I talk about, like, if you say 80% of the property owners pay less, well, if they ask you who pays more, you have to tell them. But I always found better results with just giving them the numbers and not giving them like a list of people or you know, I've never been a big fan of the map that said people in this neighborhood pay more and people in this neighborhood pay less. Usually it's the people in the poorer neighborhoods who save and the people who are in the richest neighborhoods who pay more. But even calling attention to that makes the politician nervous, because the people in the richer neighborhoods are the source of most of the campaign funds. They are the people who are most politically active. They are the people who create the most problems for you. They create that rancor I was talking about. So that's one of those things that I don't try to hide, but I don't try to advertise. To me, it's like, first of all, we have data that, you have data that you have done for this purpose that shows the effects in that municipality or in some sample municipalities in the state if you're going to a state legislator. And then the second thing is we have empirical data from the cities that have done it, both in Pennsylvania, and we have older studies of places that did it in Australia. And this is very appealing, that you get increased construction and renovation, you get increased economic activity. That's something they all want, almost all. And there are some fat and happy municipalities that don't want development, but the places that are going to do this are the distressed communities. And the states are looking at, we just wanted it to be a local option, so Baltimore can do it, or so Clairton can, we have these, every state has municipalities that are in trouble. And you talk about, we want it to be an option so they can do it. And if if you say, well, I don't think it will work in this other place, you say, well, they probably won't do it then. And so making it a local option makes it much easier to sell. One thing, Georgists tend to make it grandiose. If you're trying to inspire the average person about what a great idea this is and turn them into a Georgist, the more grandiose the vision you can present, the better. But politicians want to do something that's safe, and they want to make things better, but they don't have to create utopia. All they want to do is they want the voters to be pleased with the way things are going. And the best selling point of that is to say, well, in the studies we've done, we found that even a little bit of land tax stimulates economic growth. And what's a little bit to a Georgist is a lot to other people, but like, we got economic growth in Pittsburgh. Well, Bill Coyne doubled the land tax rate. Well, doubling the land tax rate means you're making it twice as expensive to hold a vacant lot. We don't talk about that much. The politician doesn't talk about that much because he wants to talk about how, because of what I did, the average homeowner's tax bill went up $25 instead of $45. That's what he wants to say. He doesn't want to antagonize that vacant lot owner. But the fact of the matter is, the economic growth happens because the people with the vacant lots start selling them. So, so just saying, if we do this gently, we're not slamming the vacant lot owner. We're going to have a gradual increase, and he's going to respond to it. The other thing is, don't change under pressure. We had in New London, we had a situation where the guy who was the local contact said, we'll package it this way. Well, then this group got all upset. So he said, well, we'll tweak it so that this group doesn't pay more. And as soon as that happens, everybody who pays more is going to want to tweak. And by the time we were done with it, it was so complicated that they just dropped the whole thing. So compromise on the rate of change. Don't compromise on the direction of change. Because if you take your foot off the gas pedal, you'll still get there. You'll just get there more slowly. But if you start veering away towards some other proposal, then you're eventually going to veer completely away from what your intended destination was. So you have to be very careful about those kinds of things. And that's the main thing. The other thing is that you don't have to be really good at it. And Steve Cord used, everybody said Steve Cord has this tremendous ego. He thinks that he's like God's gift to this stuff. And in a way he did, but he would say to me, this is just selling. Think of yourself as a salesman. It's just selling. And he said, and I'm not a good salesman. The reason I get a lot of sales is because I knock on a lot of doors. When Steve started doing this, there were 53 third-class cities, and he visited all of them. And he talked to multiple people in all of them. And so his batting average was really low in terms of all the people who talked to, how many did he actually get? Well, it wasn't a lot, but he went to all those cities, and he got lots of victories. I think my pitch was better, but I didn't go to a lot of cities, so I got like 2 victories, and he got like 12. So I'm looking at this and saying, you don't have to, you'll get better as you go on. You don't have to have it right. You just have to do it. You just have to knock on the door and talk to people. Pittsburgh, we got Pittsburgh because John Weaver, before Steve Cord got involved, John Weaver was this old guy in his 90s when I knew him, was in his late 80s when he knocked on the door of Bill Coyne, and he had just a simple handwritten sheet of paper that had the land and building values in the different wards. And that's all he had. And he said, if you went to a land value tax, the Golden Triangle wards would pay a whole lot more, and the richest wards would pay more, and all the other wards would pay less. And that was enough. It was like a very unsophisticated thing. It was not enough to get Coyne to just pass land value tax, but it was enough to get Coyne to say, I'm interested in this. I want to find out more about it. And then John Weaver put him in touch with Steve Cord, and I found out about it because he was talking about it in the newspaper, and so I got involved. But that, don't think that you can't do it, because it's their job to solve this problem. And if you have a solution and it's their job to find a solution, then as long as you don't say something that alienates them, you're probably going to help the situation. So that's all.
Okay, thank you, Dan. I'm going to make a couple of comments myself before we have questions. And that is, I was just thinking that I've been a public official most of my life. And actually, I worked at the various levels of government. My first job was in the city of Southfield, Michigan. And there we just started with redoing the land values. That was the whole goal and objective. And I went to the county level and was responsible for assessments in Sacramento County, California. And there again, we set the goal as being land assessments. And then third, I went on to British Columbia. That's the state provincial level. And we set up the whole, when we established it, we set up the whole goal of doing land as the priority, doing it first. And we'll get down to buildings when we're all done with getting the land done correctly. And when I started in British Columbia, only about 18% of the total property value was land. By the time I left, over 50% was land values. That's how underassessed land is typically and how easy it is to correct it. And I remember in British Columbia, I had a part in writing the taxation legislation, and I just threw in as one of the options land value taxation. No one ever asked why. No one ever said, well, why? Who wants to do this? I just said, just put it in. It's an option, you know. So that was in the legislation for 10 years until I left British Columbia, but none of the cities adopted land value taxation, but at least they could. My observations as being a public official were one, when people approached me to do something or to get something, they never started with the subject. They always started talking about what they thought I would be interested in, whether it be baseball or good government or anything. They would never start talking about what their real reason was for being there. They'd always try to get me, get on my side, get me understanding what was happening, be friendly. And that I think is one thing I'd kind of advise people. It works well if you get the public official to kind of get on base with you, even complimenting him so that they feel comfortable in talking with you. The other thing I learned is that people who present good, well-founded arguments, you pay time and attention with. When people came in with something that I had to look at, I had to consider, and it was well documented, I was able then to ask questions and ask them to do things. And it was much, much more successful than a person who just came in and said their taxes were too high, fix them. You'd pay no attention to those people at all. So those are just a few observations I have as having been a unelected public official. I never ran for office. I always got these jobs on a basis of being appointed because I knew what I was doing. We're going to open up to questions now. And Sue, have you been making any notes about questions that people have been asking?
Yes. Let's go to the Q&A, and I'm going to start with Bill Batt, who says, talking with city leaders is different than with state people. With cities, I've asked what they saw as the greatest problem: vacant land, absentee ownership, derelict buildings, parking, competing with suburbs. With state legislatures, I prefer to talk with their staffers. That's a comment.
With state legislators, you will talk to the staffers, whether that's what you prefer or not. If you talk to the state legislator, it will be very brief. If you talk to the staffer, it will be longer. And the other thing is that staffers can ask what we call stupid questions. A state legislator is less likely, he might have a question in mind that makes him suspicious of this, but he won't ask it because he doesn't want to look stupid. But because he's elected, his ego is part of what keeps him in office. But a staffer doesn't have that problem. So you can be very candid with a staffer, and a staffer can be very candid with you. I like discussing it with staffers.
Josh? Gibb?
Yeah, I quite agree. I have my hand up. I encourage everybody to use that little doodad that helps you raise your hand. I quite agree that at the state level, you're going to spend all of your time with the staffer. And they're the people that are also going to stay there long after the legislator herself is gone. They're just going to move to another legislator. And I think that in Maryland, certainly, we had a cadre of staffers who, for one reason or another, thought that Georgism was cute or interesting, but also fulfilled a need, a public need, in the sense of them being institutional civil servants. And at the city level, I think that I think Dan can certainly back me up on this. Is a lot of the chiefs of staff bounce from council person to council person, and they take the germ and the virus with them of Georgism or LVT.
Yeah, and I've had staff people give me a complete rundown of how various council members in Pittsburgh think. So, you know, so he said, well, this council member, logical argument doesn't work very well with him, but he's very visual, and if you give him a list of examples, he will understand it. He thinks in terms of examples. So I had no idea that was the case, and I went to him and asked him for a list, and he gave me a list of people in his own family. And I thought, oh, this is going to be awkward. But when I gave him the list, I said, well, these houses, you know, your family owns these houses, they save, and these other ones pay more. And he said, yeah, well, the ones that pay more are the ones that we bought that we need to remodel, and they should pay more. And so, you know, I was very pleasantly surprised that he wasn't put off at all by the properties that paid more. Yeah, knowing how council members think is really useful, and the staffers who have been there for a while know that.
Okay, next question is, Yanni asked us, do any of us have examples of elevator pitches or single page summaries of Georgism?
I think we all have, yeah, we all have that. We all have examples, and we even have filmed examples. I think, Yanni?
Yeah.
Okay. Yanni heard a presentation I gave at the Henry George School that lasted for hours and hours on land value tax. But what I wanted people to take out of it was how to boil down a vision of the world as a better place, which would terrify a politician, how to boil down that vision into something that you can do in 4 or 5 minutes. And you can, anybody can. The attention span of the world has gotten so short that it's a requirement of the job now.
I want to make a custom elevator pitch for the person I'm talking to. I don't want to have I'm not looking for the perfect pickup line. I'm looking for a real communication with a real individual. And that's why I say you should research the person. You should find the newspaper stories that, you know, what has he been bragging about or complaining about or concerned about, and just say, you know, okay, well, you have high crime in your area. You know, when Pittsburgh went to land value tax, we became the lowest crime large city in the country. And now that we've gotten rid of land value tax, our crime rates are going up again. There's a real affordability issue tied to crime, and land value tax helps keep housing affordable. So if that's their issue, that's what I would start with. And I would just say that and say, you know, we can do some research and figure out what this would cost people, how it would affect them. But that's all. I'm not trying to sell them Georgism. I'm trying to get them interested in considering a tax shift.
I'd like to just talk about what Ted mentioned in that he was able to get a local option into the British Columbia. It was never acted on, but Ted did his part. This is a team effort, and that someone will come along 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and they will pick up the baton and they will do what Ted has suggested, and that someone, some municipality will find out that this is a beneficial thing for them to do. I would also encourage you to watch your language. Don't touch on any of those hot button issues, zoning being one of them. But the other thing that you don't want to go in there, because some people have a vision, just something that they've heard about Henry George, that some people view him as a socialist. I do not, but some people do. So you don't want to touch that, because this is a very middle of the road. We don't want to go in there and say, this is really going to nail those speculators, those landlords. They're gonna really regret that we did anything, that we're going to really nail them. The landed aristocracy are going to be running out of town. Well, that is exactly what nobody wants to hear. That the mayor doesn't want to hear it, the city council. They do not want the torches and the pitchforks showing up at their office. You want to, and Steve Cord mentioned this, that what we are offering is something that's very small, that we can say, well, the mill rate on land and buildings is 3% on land and buildings. Well, what we are advocating is that you tax land at 3.1% and buildings at 3%. That's just a very, very small thing, and that you'd be surprised at what happens. Now they have some sort of experience, and they can say, well, the world did not collapse when we did that. And that, okay, now we might be willing to, after we look at that for a couple of years. And so now we've got to have this long-term perspective that it may take you and your friends and associates 10 years before you end up with any sort of meaningful land value tax. That these things take time, and people would like to observe what happens and talk to their friends and associates, the transportation, the streets and sanitation people. What happened? What is going on now that we've done this? And well, it seems to be working. I've noticed that semi-good things are happening, but we don't have utopia today. But that's a lot better. Not having utopia today is a lot better than saying the buildings are being torn down because we made a mistake.
I wanted to quickly say that when Pittsburgh got land value tax in 1913, it was the opponents of land value tax that kept bringing up Henry George. It was not the supporters.
I'll just make one final comment that politicians invariably go to a lot of dinners where they serve relatively cheap chicken dinners or what have you. That's the usual.
Rubber
and
chicken.
then they are considered to be the guest speaker. I've been asked by more than one politician if I've got any jokes. So if you can come up with a joke that you think is pretty well for them, they have to do this all the time. So they're looking for material that'll work for them. They also are looking for examples and one of the best examples, because we all like watching movies, Chinatown with Jack Nicholson is a land movie. It's about speculating, and that Jack Nicholson was uncovering a water project outside of San Francisco that was now going to increase the land value. And so this was something. And so this is a way in which you can bring the idea to them in an entertaining way. So you can come up, and as you come to Georgist conferences, you can talk to other people that have different movies that accent the Georgist perspective, and that this is then entertaining. It gives you something to talk about. Wasn't Jack, won an Academy Award? Wasn't that a great movie?
Josh, you had something to say, I think, there for a minute. Where you were.
Actually, no, I was just chortling and with
You're
my
just
dog.
chortling. Next question is from Alan Ridley. In your opinion, where are the greatest opportunities to move forward? We're not going to get LVT in California anytime soon. We have a huge need for affordable housing. It's not LVT, but we made a very tiny step forward with facilitating accessory dwelling units. Any suggestion? I don't
For
know.
anybody who doesn't know, what he's talking about is liberalizing the zoning. So if you're zoned single family, you're not excluded from having a, they're sometimes called the mother-in-law cottage or something,
Right.
that you can have an auxiliary building for a relative or whatever. And some of them are more liberal than others. Some of them allow that to be rented to anybody. But yeah, that's a zoning change. I would say in California that California is going to be a very tough battle, but it's going to get to the point where I see a major shift to land value tax happening in California before it happens anywhere else, just because when you make things terrible, people are willing to consider things that they weren't willing to consider before. So I think you need to not think about getting an immediate victory. I think you need to be, you know, you need to talk to Hispanics about how, you know, this land originally belonged to Hispanics and was basically stolen from them. And there's an interesting history to that. And you know, the home ownership in California is falling so fast that renters will be an overwhelming majority in not a long time. So I think that there's really an opportunity there, but it's not something, you can't win it the way we won it in Pennsylvania. We won it in Pennsylvania because nobody was paying attention. And so we quietly went in there and got cities to do it, and then got the state government to create a local option for boroughs. Well, the state government created a local option for cities, and nobody paid attention to that either. So, you know, it's an entirely different in California, and your strategy is going to be different. The other thing is that I have a for-profit land trust proposal that is maybe more viable in California, or on the border, or just across the border from California, although there's no populated areas just across the border from California except in Mexico.
I'd like to plug the idea of the land trust concept as a way of halfway moving towards Georgism, especially if it's a for-profit CLT. And we have, I think Dan knows Penny Giles in the Francisville Community Development Corporation, and Bruno Mosier, Gibb, first introduced her to the idea of Henry George.
Quickly, Francisville is a neighborhood in Philadelphia.
Yes. Sorry, inside baseball. And the idea of having a for-profit CLT is something that they're interested in moving towards. Most people consider community land trust as sort of different affordable housing scheme, when instead you can almost secede, the group can almost secede from the existing government and do things better. You can bring in commercial, you can bring in light industrial, and Dan and Ed Dodson, who many of you know, have some pretty good ideas that our viewers should request, and we'll send the material.
Okay, Gibb, any comments? Okay, I have a question for you from Yanni. He wants to know, is the vacant lot the only thing a Georgist can pitch for? I was hoping for something more radical, such as tax the rent collectors, which our current situation is the most pertinent with cities and states struggling for money?
I would not advocate that approach. And if anything, we all wish to have that home run in which we show up to a mayor's office or the governor's office and that they all say, oh, that's a wonderful idea. Come back next week, I'll have a law drafted and I'd like you to review it. And then in a couple of years, it's done and you can celebrate. It just does not work that way. We need to figure out a way in which we can not get those home runs, but a lot of singles. For instance, I was going to Toastmasters, and that I had given a number of speeches on land value taxation. I've always talked around the subject to make it interesting, and that one of the people there was had been an assessor. She had worked in real estate before, and that unfortunately I was leaving, I was moving, but she wanted, she almost got me a spot on a training session for assessors, because assessors have to go through yearly training, one day a year to talk about something. And that I've had other opportunities where people hear what I've got to say, and then they'll say, well, how about, could you come in and talk with our planning department? Or here's the planner that works in the downtown area. The places that we are successful and among the bureaucracy are those people who are into municipal finance, because we offer a way in which we can offer them perhaps more money that will then do some good. Transportation planners are very familiar with this. They just need a little reminding. The realtors and assessors, transportation planners, all of those people have instinctively know what we're talking about, because this is in their wheelhouse, within their general terminology of what they deal with every day. So that this is a way in which you can get the institution that they work with, and that they will then pass that on within various realtors, various assessors, transportation planners, etc. And that now, once we have that basic knowledge, they can take the ball and run with it. The same is true with those other types of organizations. Many times they are financed by the state. Sometimes they're financed by each municipality, but in Wisconsin, they had the League of Municipalities. And that was, the mayors would elect, so all the mayors were honorary members of that, and then they would hire a professional staff, and then they would all come. They were looking for model legislation. They were looking for things that what was the best practice for recycling, picking up the garbage. A municipality would say, well, we need new police cars. What should we get? Should we get Dodges, Fords, stay with the Crown Victorias? What should we do? And then the League of Municipality would study the issue and say, well, we think these are the two best ones that you could get, so that now they're saving time and energy for the other municipalities where they don't have to do all that research. So if you can get someone in the League of Municipalities interested in what you've got, they will then recycle that idea again and again and again, because the mayors come and go. They might be there for 10 years. That's a long time for a mayor. And others then come in, and people will ask them, what are some good ideas for getting us more money? Or what's some good ideas on getting these vacant lots developed?
Dan,
I wanted
you. Oh, I'm sorry. I would ask you to relate the story of the Pennsylvania Association of Boroughs and how their government guy, I can't remember.
Jack Gardner was his name.
Yeah. And I would ask you to relate how he carried our water and then some.
Yeah. I was going to say, first of all, that no state legislator is going to create a local option if no localities have asked for it. So, so when we got the borough option, we had several boroughs draft official resolutions and send them to the state legislature asking for that option. And the Pennsylvania Association of Boroughs endorsed it. And so as soon as they endorsed it, their lobbyist we basically did what he told us to do. And he walked the legislation through, and we pretty much did whatever he asked for. And there's a good chance we would have gotten it the first year, except we had our state association of boroughs leader said, "You have the votes. Don't say any more." It's kind of like a salesman. The salesman's pitch is, when they say yes, hand them the pen. Stop talking and hand them the pen. Because if you keep talking, you might say something that spooks them. And we had somebody go off and start talking to all the state legislators who was not working under he's not following the lead of Jack Gardner. And apparently somebody from the Farm Bureau or some farmers group got wind of it and thought it was going to hurt the farmers. And so that killed it for that year. And then the year after that, it passed with a terrible provision in there to protect farmers that is undoubtedly unconstitutional. If it ever gets invoked, could kill the whole bill. So we don't promote land value tax in boroughs that could have a farm in them, just because of that stupid provision. So yeah, you have to be careful. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say is, if you've done your job right, it will come to a public hearing. And if you've done your job right, there's nothing more for you to say to the elected officials. You have fully informed the elected officials. So, we have the 1990 tax swap video that a lot of people have seen. And when you look at that, you can see that not only Steve Court and I, but most of the people who are pro land value tax were really talking to the rest of the people in the room. We weren't really talking to the elected officials. What we're trying to convey is that you can win these people over by saying the things that we were saying. And even when you're talking to an elected official individually, there's something that happens to people who have to get reelected all the time, which is, when you say something to them, they're not just thinking, that sounds good when you say it to me. They're also thinking, will this sound good when I have to explain it to the public? And so if you can keep it simple and you can say it in terms that he not only has to understand it, he has to understand it so well that he can make other people understand it. And that means you have to keep it very simple. And that's more important than you would realize. And so when you're saying, let's tax the rent collectors, well, he's going out into the world and he can't go out and say, if I'm reelected, I'm going to tax the rent collectors, or reelect me because I tax the rent collectors, because the rent collectors are the campaign contributors. The rent collectors are a significant portion of the voting public. You don't want to focus attention on the people who aren't going to like it. You focus attention on who you're going to untax.
Okay, Josh?
Yeah, I have sort of an addition to that. I don't disagree at all. But in Connecticut, half of my testimony in front of the legislature over a period of 6 years, my God, 6 years, was and Ted will recognize this group, the Connecticut BIA, the Building and Industry Association. And they believe that they're protecting the best interests of producers and factory owners, that kind of a thing. and they opposed, the BIA opposed LVT year in and year out. And they're very powerful. I think we would all agree. Every state has one. And finally, I shouldn't say but CSE made a presentation in front of this special subcommittee on municipalities in Connecticut. And the BIA guy said, you know what? Can you come and talk to us in our office in Hartford? And I said, oh, sure, of course. And they were in one of those few surviving gorgeous tall buildings in Hartford. And I said, this is who's going to not like LVT, not your members. And I took them to the window and we looked at the flat top parking lots right next door to the Capitol, right next door to the surviving office buildings. And I said, they're the ones that you're protecting with this, really. And he said, okay, we're not going to support it, period, because we play golf with these guys. But starting in the year 2013, they did not oppose it actively. And I think that's why we did all right in Connecticut eventually.
Yeah, Bill Coyne always went to the people who were going to pay more. And I said, you're not going to win them over. He says, they don't have to support it. They just have to respect that it's not personal, that, you know, I'm not out to get them. and as long as they can respect that, then they're not going to start a war.
Alan Ridley has a question. He said, looking at the present and the future, how can we better leverage COVID-19, white nationalism, violence in the streets, etc.?
I would stay away from all that.
I mean, COVID-19 is the only opportunity, and it doesn't have to be ghoulish. We simply say COVID-19 has impacted all of the bad taxes more than the property tax. And it's what's putting people out of work. It's what's killing small business. I mean, look at the constituencies that can grow out of that. The American people, or people anywhere else, the American people will agree that restaurants and bowling alleys and people losing their jobs and people not buying anything is a disaster.
It might be a good time to suggest that you could use land value tax to make up revenue that you lose by, for example, most states, the sales tax does not fall on groceries, but it does fall on prepared food. And you can say, as a first step, the hardest hit here, other than the airlines and the hotels, are the restaurants. Why don't we just treat prepared food like we treat groceries and not tax it? And there's arguments for that. Poor people, really poor people, homeless people, eat almost all prepared food because they have no kitchen, so there's things you can do for that. I would mostly stay away from questions of violence in the street and white supremacy. Those are things that, land value tax is very calm and intellectual and dry. And those things are very emotional and charged, and I think they would overwhelm. I think nobody would believe that land value tax would solve those problems. When you talk about housing affordability, you can make that logical connection. It's only 2 or 3 steps between encouraging construction and reducing housing costs. But it's, 15 steps to addressing white supremacy or I think you can do it. With Mississippi was the first state to shift from property tax to sales tax.
Yep.
So the big plantation owners wouldn't have to sell off to blacks who were ready to own their own land and not work for others. So, you can make that statement, but I don't know that you can build a whole case around LVT from it.
I have a comment to give that Chinatown was LA, not San Francisco. And then Yanni has a couple of good ideas in terms of some movies that he said. City Hall with Al Pacino is another good one to talk about. Yanni and Alan, I love you, but anybody else have any comments? And like, we've got about 15 more minutes and then we have to call it a night.
I wanted to say quickly that I've been wanting to investigate copyright laws because I've seen people on the internet who would use segments less than 20 seconds long, and they seem to be under the impression that YouTube would respect a fair use claim if the segment were less than 20 seconds long. So we could maybe get short clips from major movies and do a Georgist analysis of the cinema.
We had a little bit of discussion before we started about the impact of zoning. Do any of you want to talk about that? How zoning influences or affects land value?
Well, I wouldn't talk about it to elected officials unless it comes up. But there's a lot of people who hate zoning, and so like when I'm talking to libertarians, zoning always comes up whether I bring it up or not, and I'm always, yeah, we're against zoning and we're for land value tax. And a lot of zoning is to overcome the irrationality of our land tenure and tax system. So we have, you know, why would anybody want to build a skyscraper in a single family home, you know, a high-rise apartment building in an area zoned for single family homes? Well, because the land is too expensive to build a high-rise where the other high-rises are. But if you're a person looking to live in a high-rise apartment building, you want the kind of density and amenities. You know, it's only if you're surrounded by other high-rise apartment buildings that there's going to be a major supermarket within walking distance, and there's going to be several restaurants within, you know, if you're in that area of other high-rises, that's where you want to build your high-rise, because the people who want high-rises want the high-rise experience. They don't just want to be on the 17th floor. So, you know, the land tenure system is irrational, and zoning is usually an attempt to fix it.
I would also caution you about enlarging the argument that you have come to talk about land value taxation. And if you now say that this is going to help with zoning, now you've opened up a whole bunch of questions as to how that's going to deal with it, and that now they've got, well, you've just increased all of the pitfalls that you can come into, that you can, I wouldn't make the case that this is going to lower sales taxes or the price of gasoline or any of those things. It's got to cut down on commuting times. All of those things are, it just increases all of the pitfalls that you can fall into, and that it doesn't, you need to stay on message. And our message is land value taxation.
Yeah, and that was Steve Cord's technique. People would bring up these questions, and he would kind of half answer them and half ignore them, and get right back to land value tax. And sometimes people were frustrated with that. I think it's good to have the answers to zoning questions and other questions, but don't bring it up. If they bring it up, you need to be able to answer it. And like Josh said, sometimes it's smarter to say, let me get back to you on that. Because for two reasons. One is it gives you an excuse for another meeting, but the other is it gives you, it it conveys the sense that you are doing something that they asked for. In other words, even if you have if they say, how will this affect apartment buildings, and you have the papers right in your folder that apartment buildings would save even more than homeowners, you can show them that right then and there and look really smart. But your goal is not to look smart. Your goal is to make them grateful.
Yep.
And so you say, let me find out how this affects apartment buildings and get right back to you. And then 2 days later, you mail them something that explains how it affects the apartment buildings. And they'll think, boy, that guy really, he really wants to help, because look what he did just for me. And it has a psychological effect.
Josh, any comments on zoning?
I think when Gibb and I were speaking, zoning is not quite a third rail, but it's right up there.
Okay.
I mean, we have been able to demonstrate in Philadelphia, for example, that a change in zoning really trumps land values. And I don't mean to use the word Trump, but as Ted, as our moderator can say, when zoning changes for the better or for the worse, whatever your opinion is, that it drastically can change what the tax revenues are. And some of you may not know, but I always brag, is that Ted and Mel Gibson went toe-to-toe in Greenwich, Connecticut over
Mel Gibson's agents.
over his farm.
His farm.
Yes.
Well,
No,
Ted,
Mel
I
was
think
claiming he was a farmer, and actually he was, but he never sold anything to anybody. He just had this beautiful estate, worth $30 million with some farm equipment and farm animals on it that he enjoyed. But he was not a true farmer. He never sold anybody anything.
Yeah, of course not. But that's a great story about how a zoning, a statewide zoning program in this case, we call it Clean and Green in Pennsylvania, can have awful implications for public finance and public policy.
Ed Dodson has.
Before you go further, I wanted to say, if an elected official brings up zoning, it's a good time to ask to get him talking, and to say, well, tell me, what are your concerns about zoning? And let him explain why he's bringing up zoning, because you only want to address his actual concern. And if you just start talking about zoning generally, you're probably going to address something you think he's concerned about, and he's actually concerned about the exact opposite of that. So, sometimes when they bring up something like that, it's a good time to encourage them to elaborate on it.
To open up, yeah.
Okay, this is a comment from Ed Dodson. Josh will remember our presentation together in Pittsburgh, sponsored by Fannie Mae, to a broad spectrum of civic leaders and stakeholders. None of them had any idea that Pittsburgh had a two-rate property tax and that it had been lost. Public memories seem to be very short, was the comment. That's going to be our last question, because we are getting on to about an hour and a half in.
Well, I can say that, Ed, I don't think that event ever happened. I think it's all in your mind. But seriously, one of the attendees was a minister. And Dan, you will confirm that minister, Ricky Burgess, is now a council person in Pittsburgh. So I know they didn't know about it, but I know that Burgess knows about it, because I helped write an op-ed speaking up for the exemption or for the taxation of tax-exempt land in Pittsburgh. He remembered, these people that get up that far, doesn't matter what town it is, Du Bois, Pittsburgh, they remember. They have great memories. Nixon remembered everybody he ever met, and that was part of his magic. He had no personality, but he remembered so much. And Councilman Burgess remembered us, and we helped him out on a few things. But that's what you can do if you hit people with a good idea, and then, as Dan says, demonstrate how it works in your particular community. So I think Ed Dodson made a big success in Pittsburgh at the CBDG, and Michael Foreman was there, a big shot with Act 47.
And I'm going to comment something that you and Josh brought up last night at a Henry George Institute Education Committee meeting. You talked about education goes hand in hand with activism. And the fact that when you need your backup, you go to your educator because they'll have the statement you need, correct? Do I remember? Because I was busy taking notes that night, but
for myself, what I was talking about as an activist and somebody who works on the front lines with my panelists here is that if you can bring into the meeting somebody like Lindy Davies, which you can't now, but Lindy was a great participant when we spoke to the highest elected officials in New York City. And it was sort of like wind up Lindy, and he does the Georgists thing. And he did such a good job of it that he didn't take up people's time. And he went with us to the Fed, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York City, to give a talk on LVT. I mean, I helped with the numbers and the graphics, but Lindy got up on his hind legs and educated them about Georgism, about LVT. And everybody was pretty interested, and half of them, of course, knew about Henry George. These are Fed economists. And I think that was a great advantage of bringing together the activist and educational wing of the Georgist movement, such as it is.
That impressed me last night, so I thought we should bring that, what I learned. I think that Yanni has said this is like one of the best seminars of our conference this year. I'd like to thank you all for coming. Any closing words?
I just want to thank everyone for coming also. And we're not going to have any session this weekend because it's Independence Day weekend, but a week from today, the 7th of July, we're going to have a session on activism. And if you know of any activist groups such as Common Ground and those types of groups, encourage them to speak to me or to Sue or to Dan about giving a short presentation about what they're working on. So that's a week from tonight. I look forward to having you there again.
All right. We'd like to thank our donors. The Robert Schockenbach, Dan will put up our little.
Oh, okay. I gotta find my share screen. There it
Yeah,
is.
you gotta find your share screen, please. Yes. Okay.
So yeah, like to thank the Robert Schalkenbach Foundation for being the primary supporter of this. Also, the Foundation for Economic Justice, Common Ground USA, the Henry George Institute, Earth Sharing Associates, and private donors. Thank you all.
Thank you. See you next week, gang.